Hey guys, I'm Heidi Priebe. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time here. On this channel, we use different psychological models as means of understanding ourselves better, understanding other people better, and overall trying to improve the health of our relationships and our life in general. So what that means is getting more of what we do want out of our lives and our relationships and less of what we don't want. And today, the psychological model I'm going to be referencing is the model of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into what CPTSD is. If you don't know, I will leave some links in the description of this video so you can go learn a little bit more before coming back. But I also want to make it clear that you don't have to have CPTSD to relate to what I'm going to say in this video. So much of what I say is going to apply to anyone who struggles with feelings of toxic shame, as well as anyone who may have a very insecure attachment style. So the reason I'm using the term CPTSD is because I believe that what I'm about to talk about applies most directly to those with CPTSD. However, if you recognize yourself in this video, it doesn't necessarily mean you have CPTSD, because the cycle that I'm about to describe is going to apply to people in a wide range of contexts. So, what I want to talk about today is the relationship between toxic shame and procrastination, and how this can become a cycle that ends up feeling quite self-defeating for a lot of people who struggle with it. So the procrastination, or the not getting things done, or the watching problems in your life pile up larger and larger over time, is kind of what I look at as a symptom of a more underlying problem. The underlying problem being a sense of toxic shame and the belief that everything that goes wrong in your life, that the ways in which you struggle to tend to practical or emotional or relational concerns, is due to you just being an inherently flawed or broken person. What I want to do with this video is start to dispel that myth and offer some perspective and some language that might help you reconceptualize why certain areas of your life tend to get to these kind of emergency points, as well as what tools you can use to start slowly reversing that process. And the last thing I want to make clear before we get started is that I am not a licensed psychologist, so this is not clinical advice. I do have a bachelor's degree in psychology and a Master of Science in Attachment Theory and Research, so some of what I'm going to say is informed from my background in attachment theory. However, all I am doing here is looking at patterns that exist within what I personally have read and observed in people I know who struggle with complex PTSD, toxic shame, and insecure attachment patterns. So like with anything, if there's something in this video that works for you, feel free to take it and leave whatever does not work for you. All right, without further ado, to get us started off, I want to lay out a formula of what tends to happen when someone who has a strong sense of toxic shame or complex PTSD encounters a life stressor. And I want to contrast it to what someone with a more secure sense of self or a secure attachment style is going to do in the same type of situation. And the reason I want to provide that contrast is because I want to start normalizing some of the challenges that those of us with toxic shame face that we might be wrongly attributing to a failure of the self or something being broken, corrupt, or wrong with the self, when in fact we are just coming up across stressors that the average person experiences but might not end up in the same kind of downwards mental health spiral around them because they are able to properly attribute the cause of their stress, as opposed to over-assuming responsibility for everything that is going wrong. So without further ado, let's look at what happens when a secure person versus someone with toxic shame, attachment wounding, or CPTSD encounters a major life stressor. So major life stressors happen to absolutely everybody. It does not matter what your upbringing was like, what your attachment style is, life is inherently stressful. Challenges come up. Curveballs get thrown in our path. Relationships involve conflicts that become challenging, right? Experiencing stress is inherent to being alive. So let's say you come up against a major life stressor, and I'll give some examples just so we can kind of track this with something real. Let's say you suddenly lose your job, or you don't have a job, and rent is coming up and you don't have a way to make rent. That would be considered a major life stressor. Let's say you are taking a graduate program, and you have a dissertation due and you are ill prepared to finish it on time. Let's say you are in a relationship and you're feeling a little bit uncertain and like your partner might not necessarily want a future with you and you're feeling kind of rejected. All of these things are normal life stressors. They could happen to anybody. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. However, the way someone with CPTSD or toxic shame is going to interpret these stressors is going to be very different than the way a secure person does. So a secure person, when encountering a life stressor, tends to have a sense of self-compassion around it. So there's this feeling of something difficult is happening for me. I'm stressed about it, and that stress is often seen and acknowledged and accepted. But the next step, because there is an assumption inherent to the secure worldview that stress is a normal part of life, is to find ways to cope with that stress that actually help the problem get solved. And I want to be very clear, this is much easier for the person with a secure attachment system to do because it's highly likely that they have a social network that they can reach out to receive a reasonable level of support. It's highly likely that they developed strong emotional regulation skills in childhood or that they taught those to themselves in adulthood if they earn secure attachment. And it's likely that they have not encountered a disproportionate amount of extreme stressors in their life. That's not a guarantee. That's not to say that there are not secure people who've experienced extreme stressors. However, it's less likely because if you do not have a complex trauma history, you're more likely to have a more resourced life in every sense of the term. So a secure person who doesn't have a way to make rent next month or who's going through a significant educational or relationship challenge is highly likely to recognize that they need both comfort and support in order to navigate through that challenge. So what they're going to do is go, okay, I'm stressed, so maybe I'm going to need to reach out to my social support network and lean a little bit more heavily on my friends, family, loved ones than I normally do as I'm navigating through this period of difficulty. But also, I'm going to think about where I might be able to source help. So if I'm struggling academically, which professors should I go talk to see what I should do? If I'm struggling financially, are there social services I can look at that might be able to help me figure out where I can get the resources I need if I'm in a pinch? If I'm struggling in my relationship, who might I be able to go talk to, or is there a professional I could consult to kind of figure out what's going on and gain some additional context for myself or some additional skills for myself if that's what's needed to help me navigate through any of these specific challenges. And because there's this natural sense of interconnectedness in the secure worldview, it tends to be easier for them to go access the services they need as well as the social support that they need to navigate through periods of stress more effectively. Now, let's contrast this to someone who has complex PTSD, insecure attachment, or toxic shame, or all of the above, as it often happens. When you experience a life stressor as a member of one of those groups, what's highly likely to happen is that you're not going to recognize your own need for comfort and support, particularly if you have complex PTSD, which is the result of early repetitive traumas that leave you with the feeling of hopelessness. So there is a learned helplessness aspect to complex PTSD. If you have certain traumas, like let's say a specific relational trauma that happens over and over again and you don't see a way out of it because you were a child when it happens and you're under-resourced, you might develop this worldview of problems are not solvable. As soon as a problem feels a certain level of big and overwhelming, there is no way out of the problem. I just assume I'm going to be stuck inside of this problem forever. What might not occur to you is that there are social resources that are available to you, or that you might need some comfort and social support navigating through the challenge. The reason those things might not occur to you is because you may have internalized from a very young age, social systems are not here to help me. They're for normal people, and I am not normal, which is a core belief of having toxic shame. Ergo, there are not social support networks that I can reach out to for practical help. And you may not even be cognizant of the fact that you have a need for comfort, period. Because most people with complex PTSD, toxic shame, or severe attachment wounding did not receive comfort on a consistent basis in their childhood, you may never have learned that life stressors are easier to deal with if you have comfort. You may have internalized something along the lines of what helps you get through difficult periods is sucking it up, pushing down your feelings, and barreling through. However, your system still needs comfort. Even if you have consciously repressed the need for it, your system is going to naturally crave it when you are going through difficult periods. So that leads us to what tends to happen next for people who consciously or unconsciously deny or repress the need for comfort and help when they're facing a life stressor. And what tends to happen next is that dysregulation and procrastination pop up. Now, if you have a very strong need for comfort, help, and support, however, you're not even aware that you have it, which is very typical for those with toxic shame, where that feeling of vulnerability may have become a shame-bound emotion. So as soon as you feel like you need help, you can't figure something out on your own, whatever it is, shame comes and wraps that up. You're now going to start feeling dysregulated. Dysregulation happens when we can't directly resolve the feeling that we are experiencing. If you have hidden the feeling that you are experiencing from yourself because it's shame-bound, it's going to be really hard to resolve it. So if I'm feeling kind of vulnerable because I don't know how to pay my rent next month, or because I don't know how to access the resources I need to finish my educational project, or because I don't really understand what's going wrong in my relationship or how to stop these problems from happening. If I'm unable to access and directly deal with my feelings of vulnerability, I'm going to become dysregulated. I'm going to start feeling those emotions in places where they don't necessarily fit. So instead of feeling vulnerable, maybe I'll start feeling really grumpy or really irritable, or maybe I'm going to experience extreme difficulty focusing and paying attention to the projects that I'm meant to be working on, because my system is desperately trying to seek out the comfort that it needs. It's distracted by its own unmet emotional needs, which live in the body. However, if I'm not acknowledging those emotions in my mind and acting in accordance with them, I'm going to experience dysregulation. Now, the problem is that when we are in this state of dealing with extreme stress, it's very important for us to be able to focus to solve those problems, right? If I have to figure out how to make rent next month, I probably need to focus on getting work. If I need to figure out how to get a school project done, I probably need to focus on doing research. If I need to solve a series of problems in my partnership, I probably need to stay reasonably present with my partner to be able to take in what they're saying and respond in an appropriate way. However, it gets harder to do all of this the more dysregulated you are. Ergo, you start procrastinating not because you are a lazy, worthless human being, but because your system is preoccupied trying to get its underlying needs met. And if you don't know how to get those needs met directly, you're going to turn to maladaptive coping mechanisms. So maybe I figure out that I can concentrate really well if I take certain drugs. Maybe I figure out that I can get support that I don't know how to ask for out of my partner if I start a fight and then afterwards they give me comfort. Or maybe I become so afraid of my partner seeing that I'm struggling and fearing that that's going to make them feel disgusted by me that I completely pull away and isolate myself because I'm just kind of in this freeze response of if anyone sees that I'm struggling, I'm going to get abandoned. So to not make the problem worse, I'm going to isolate until it is over. Maybe I figure out that I can barrel through the day and act tough and strong and like I don't need any help if I can promise myself at the end of the day I'm going to binge eat or get drunk in order to take off the pressure. So we develop these ways of getting our needs for comfort met if we don't know how to address that need directly in ways that end up creating further problems in our lives. There's a quote that goes something along the lines of, at a certain dosage, the medicine becomes the disease. So now we find ourselves facing a new slew of problems but usually an intensification of the original problem. If I have not found a way to pay my rent because I've gotten dysregulated around the fact that I have a problem that big, and then I've been unable to concentrate on work because I'm stressed and don't know how to get comfort, and then maybe I'm eating or drinking more than usual, and then maybe I'm spending more money than usual as an attempt to get my system to calm down, now I'm probably less able to make rent than I was at the beginning of the month when the problem first cropped up. Or maybe by this point, the ways in which I've been going about maladaptively, unconsciously seeking out comfort from other people, either through creating conflict or through withdrawing, are causing new problems within my relationships that have now taken the center stage of my life. So this pile of problems keeps growing. Maybe now rent is overdue and I still have no way to pay it. Maybe now my relationship, which once had a certain problem, has a whole pile of problems because I haven't been able to address the original one in a well-regulated way. And for most people who deal with complex PTSD, toxic shame, or early attachment wounding, this is usually the point where toxic shame arrives. So this belief comes online that the reason I have this problem is because I am inherently shameful, bad, stupid, lazy, unmotivated, whatever it is. I should have just dealt with this at the time it came up. And now look how big it is. And now look how many other problems I have in my life. And instead of correctly attributing the cause of those problems to the fact that you did not learn proper coping mechanisms for tackling and sourcing comfort and support around problems, you're going to attribute the fact that these problems worsened so heavily towards yourself being a useless human being. And you might start telling yourself these stories like, I'm lazy, I'm unmotivated, anyone else would have been able to solve this as soon as it came up. I have to hide from other people how many problems I have, because if they saw how many problems I have, they would see how worthless and lazy I am and how I can't do anything right. So toxic shame and the inner critic at this point might be incredibly online for you. And when we have toxic shame, what else comes online in the body? A need for comfort. So now we are all the way back to the beginning, right? We have this need for comfort. We don't necessarily know how to get it. We don't feel like we're worthy of comfort if we are in a place of toxic shame. And so once again, the system gets dysregulated and the cycle starts over again. Now, I say all of this and I outline all of this, not to be discouraging. I do not think that this is what you are fated to if you have toxic shame, CPTSD, whatever it is. I say all of this because there is something we can use in this process if we insert it at any point that is going to help us start to reverse it and start an upward spiral instead of continuing that downwards one when we're experiencing stress in life. And the first thing I want to acknowledge is that if you are watching this video and you have complex PTSD, I'm going to say there's like a 99% chance that there has never been a point where everything is just going normal for you. You have no significant problems, challenges, or stressors, and then a singular stressor pops out of the blue and this cycle begins. You have probably been locked in this cycle for as long as you can remember, because to have complex PTSD often means you have extreme difficulty with forming close relationships, regulating your emotions, securing consistent resource. So it's likely that you have been in this state of responding to abnormal stressors for as far back as you can consciously remember. And so you don't necessarily have the option to just tackle this at step one like a secure person would and reach out to your support network of secure people who have resources they can lend you. That's likely not an option for you or not an easily available option. So we have to look at what we can do at any point in this spiral to start moving it in the opposite direction. And what we're going to talk about now is the role that self-compassion and self-understanding can play in this process. I think that for most people with toxic shame, the term self-understanding might feel more accessible, but I will be using the terms self-understanding and self-compassion interchangeably. So the first place you want to be able to apply self-compassion or self-understanding is when you are faced with a significant stressor and you have a need for comfort. It's unlikely that you're going to recognize your need for comfort consciously if you have CPTSD. Because again, if from a young age you never got comfort around life challenges, or you internalize this belief that unless something so overtly traumatic has happened to me that absolutely anybody would be incapable of functioning in the face of it, I do not have a need or I do not deserve support, care, and compassion from other people. What secure people naturally know is that being alive is inherently difficult and you need comfort for it. You don't have to be going through something intense and traumatic to need comfort. People need comfort on a day-to-day basis. They need comfort for being a little bit tired. They need comfort for having a little bit of stress at work. They need comfort for having a bit of a tense situation with someone they're close with and having difficulty feeling settled in that relationship until they figure out what's going on. People need a reasonable amount of comfort every single day. And especially when you are going through some sort of stress, needing comfort is a normal experience to have. And the reason I want to emphasize that is because if you sat down as someone with complex PTSD and looked at the intense matrix of all of the challenges and struggles and practical and interpersonal difficulties that you probably have in your life as a product of having complex PTSD, you would recognize that if you dropped a secure person into that, they would be almost overwhelmed by a need for comfort. Okay? So the fact that you are feeling distressed and dysregulated is not weird, and it's not because you're a bad, shameful person who can't cope with anything. If you have a very difficult life, you have a very high need for comfort. And if you're unable to recognize that need for comfort, the natural response is dysregulation of the system. So if you can, at step 1, that point where you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed by either one or a complex matrix of problems in your life, if you can recognize and give yourself validation around the fact that it's normal to be wanting comfort at this point, that might be the first step in getting less dysregulated around all of these problems. If you can look at the fact that you can't make rent next month, or the fact that you have a giant pile of overdue bills, or the fact that you have relationships that are in disarray, or the fact that you're really struggling to keep up with your educational commitments, as problems that naturally require comfort and support, that might not solve the problem, but it legitimizes the problem, right? And if you're able to follow the threads of these problems back in time until you're able to undo some of that toxic shame around the fact that you have them, that could also be helpful. So are you in chaotic relationships all of the time because you're just a worthless human being who hates being happy? Or are you constantly in chaotic relationships because you didn't learn appropriate relating skills as a child? You didn't have secure relationships modeled for you, and you don't actually have the skills you need to navigate relationships effectively, but if you did have those skills, you would probably use them. That's probably closer to the truth than I'm just a piece of garbage who doesn't know how to love or be loved, right? If you look at your financial challenges, not through the lens of I'm just lazy and didn't work hard enough, but through the lens of I have been low or high level dysregulated consistently for most of my life, and it's really hard to be productive and creative when you're dysregulated, it might feel a little bit easier to understand why you're experiencing chronic financial difficulties. Same with difficulties focusing or paying attention or with not procrastinating, right? It is a natural result of being dysregulated to not be able to focus well. So does this solve the problem? No, it does not solve the problem. However, it legitimizes the problem in your own mind. If you can stop shaming yourself for these problems and understand that you would not have chosen them, nobody would choose to have an abnormal level of stress in their life. Ergo, they must be the result of your system trying to solve some deeper problem that it's been incapable of doing, like, I don't know, having healthy human connection, having a sense of self-esteem and self-worth, creating stability in your emotional life. If your body is distracted by needing those things and not having them, it's not going to naturally want to focus its attention on doing more practical concerns. So again, that's not to be discouraging, it is to legitimize the fact that you have all of these problems. I remember having this moment of clarity years ago when I was in a place in my life that I now kind of look back on as almost my rock bottom emotionally, where I was so dysregulated and dealing with so many issues in my personal life and in my professional life. And it was the first year of COVID, so the world was a mess. And I had this one project that I was struggling so hard to complete. And I was getting paid a lot for the project, and there was big expectations on me for it. And I remember waking up one morning and just looking at my life almost like I was a complete outsider, and looking at the true intensity of the personal problems I was dealing with at that point in my life, and the true intensity of the practical problems I was experiencing at that point in my life, and going, if my client, the person who I'm imagining is going to judge me so harshly if I do not do a perfect job on this project, if they were truly waking up in my life, in my body, in my relationships, in my experience, and having to navigate through this day, would they be able to get this project done? And I realized probably not. They would probably have to stop and triage and deal with all of these other things that I so consistently deal with that I don't even think of them as problems anymore, that they wouldn't be able to get within a mile of the project. And it's really hard to have those moments of clarity with ourselves, because when you are adapted to chronic problems and to chronic dysregulation, it becomes the water that you swim in. You don't think this is abnormal and things that most people don't deal with. However, it helps as often as you can to stop and contextualize that for yourself. Is it possible that anybody in this situation would be equally as stressed out and experience an equal level of difficulty focusing or getting things done as I am? And if you can have compassion for yourself in that moment, then you are experiencing a moment of security. A moment in which you're able to recognize I am an inherently valuable person just like everybody else, which means that when I experience stress, I need help and comfort just like everybody else. And every time we have a moment where we're successfully able to recognize that, we start slowly training our brain to think in a slightly different way. The more moments we have where we recognize we are inherently valuable, we are not choosing the challenges and difficulties in our lives, and that it's normal for us to need help and support in navigating through them, the more we slowly inch our way towards that secure worldview, where we're able to recognize I can ask for help. There is no reason why someone else should get help and not me. I need comfort and support and care from other people. There is no reason why I should not have those things, even though everyone else should. Now, I want to be clear that doesn't mean that any one particular person owes you endless care, love, support, and attention, but it means that it would be a reasonable thing for you to do at some point along the line to build out a social support network in which you're able to give and receive support and comfort around everyday concerns and everyday stressors, both the abnormally big ones and the smaller ones that you might currently deem kind of insignificant. Now, let's drop it down a level. Let's say you aren't able to have that moment with yourself at the point where that need for comfort comes online, and you do find yourself getting a bit dysregulated. Can you, instead of shaming yourself for being lazy and not directly tackling the problem in this moment, notice and accept, oh, I'm feeling dysregulated. My system is just out of whack today. I feel grumpy, I feel anxious, I feel angry. I am not arriving in this moment with the presence that I need to tackle this task and solve my problem. And can you ask yourself the question, what is it that I need? Do I need comfort? Do I need help? Do I need support? Do I need rest? And is it possible to give that to myself? Instead of denying that I have needs, instead of denying that this has an impact on me, instead of pulling back and trying to isolate myself from everybody or trying to get comfort out of people without directly asking for it, can I take a minute and just recognize I am feeling off today? Can I attend to my feeling state instead of trying to fight the uphill battle of attempting to solve this problem when I am not in a state to solve it? And in the way that I'm tending to my feeling state, can I make sure that I'm not creating new problems for myself? So can I be a little bit mindful in this moment of which coping mechanisms I can turn to that are actually going to help me get closer to the solution of this problem rather than further away from it? Can I give myself compassion and self-understanding and use that compassion and self-understanding to start spiraling upwards towards the secure response? So the goal here is lessening the resistance we feel to our own dysregulation and procrastination, and accepting that when those things are happening for us, it's usually because our systems have a deeper need that they're trying to get met. And if we can meet that need in an adaptive way, then we're going to experience an increased sense of regulation, which pretty much always makes problem solving a lot easier. Now, I want to drop it down one more level. Let's say you've already arrived at the place, and this is probably where most of us are starting from if you have a history of complex PTSD, where the problems have significantly worsened. And you have this sense of normal people do not let X, Y, or Z problem get this bad, and toxic shame is kind of creeping into the corners of your worldview. Can you, in that moment, when thinking about that problem, take the time to explain to yourself, gently and in a non-shaming way, why you are having that problem? What sequence of events led you to this point in your life where it's possible that you have such a problem that an intelligent, worthwhile person like yourself has not yet found a way to solve? Is this because you don't know how to ask for the help or resource you need to solve this problem? Is it because you feel too much shame to access the help or resource that you need to solve this problem? Is it because you don't know how to regulate yourself enough to solve this problem? Is it because you developed a redemption fantasy as a child in order to survive a terrible childhood in which reality was not doing you any favors when it comes to staying sane, and now you're having trouble letting go of that redemption fantasy? So instead of dealing with these problems, you're dissociating into some sort of fantasy where they're all fixed. None of those things are inherently shameful. They're all normal responses to having had a difficult life. And it might be helpful to remind yourself at this point that you are definitely not the only person in the world who has had the problem that you currently have. And the reason why other people in the world have had this problem is because this problem is the natural outcome of a certain sequence of events that happened to those people and that also happened to you. Now, that doesn't mean it was an identical sequence of events, but it means that to have arrived at the place where you have arrived at, a certain number of things had to have happened, and a certain sequence of events happened to a lot of other people as well that ended them up with the same problem as you. And sometimes if I'm at that point where my problems are very bad, I like to do a loving kindness meditation where I just take a moment and center myself and draw into my awareness all of the people in the world who have this problem or a similar problem, and see if I can breathe in an awareness of that and breathe out a sense of compassion for all of us. You are definitely not the first person to have the level of financial challenge that you have, or the level of relationship challenges that you have, or the level of mental health challenges you have. There are so many other people in the world with very bad problems, and those problems did not happen to them because they are corrupt, bad, worthless human beings. Those problems happened to them because a sequence of events led them there. And if you can take a moment to have compassion, not just for yourself, but to feel a sense of connectedness to everybody who has that problem and whoever will have that problem, you can give yourself a moment of reminder that you are not alone. And it is not inherently shameful to have really bad, really intense problems that you don't know how to solve. Other people have that experience as well. Most people with complex PTSD have that experience right now in this exact moment. And you might want to even take a moment right now to pause and draw your awareness to that. How many people out there at this exact moment are probably struggling with toxic shame, complex PTSD symptoms, relational difficulties, attachment issues? The world is full of those people. And it was not any of their faults that they developed those problems, and it's not yours. However, what you do with it is up to you. You get to choose the way that you internally represent the problems you have. And the more compassion you're able to have for them in any given moment, the closer you're getting to being realistic about how to solve them. At the end of the day, the thing that is going to keep you the most stuck, if you have toxic shame, is the belief that the reason you have larger than average problems is because you are broken and shameful and there's something wrong with you. That is not true of you, it is not true of anybody, and you are not the exception to that rule. Nobody chooses a life filled with complex problems and an inability to regulate around them. Not a person on earth would choose that. You are not the exception. And the way to reverse engineer this entire downward spiral and get to a place where you're able to function, at least in a given moment, like a secure person, is to start treating yourself with self-understanding and compassion in the places where you have once only had toxic shame. And when that toxic shame arrives and when it takes over the system, it can feel incredibly overwhelming. It can feel paralyzing. It can feel disorienting. It can feel impossible to cope with. However, there is a line I love that goes, "Feeling shame does not mean you are shameful." And in those instances where the toxic shame is present and it feels really intense, what I want to challenge you to do is, can you have that feeling in your body? Can you recognize it? Can you name it as shame? This is shame, shame, shame. I'm feeling shame. And then at some point in that process, can you draw your awareness to the fact that shame is a feeling. It is not a truth about who you are, or about your character, or about the core of you. Shame is just a feeling. And if you can learn to have compassion for yourself in that moment when the shame is in your body, and have empathy for yourself as a person who is experiencing toxic shame, even for just a moment, you're going to be able to start climbing your way out of this. Compassion allows toxic shame to start lessening because you realize your problems are not personal. They are a natural consequence of the life that you have led and the circumstances that you've been through and the coping mechanisms that you developed as a result. The less personal your problems feel, the less dysregulated you're going to be every time you think about them. The less dysregulated you are when you're thinking about your problems, the more realistic of a handle you start to get on what it's going to take to fix those problems, as well as what type of support you're going to need emotionally in the process of fixing them. Getting a realistic handle on what it's going to take to fix your problems, as well as what type of emotional support you're going to need in the process, allows you to start sourcing the actual solutions and actual support and actual help that you need to start solving the practical problems in your life. And the more the practical problems in your life start getting solved, the more regulated you become overall because you start developing a safer and more secure life for yourself. And the safer and more secure and more well-regulated your life is, the more relaxed and the less overwhelmed you're going to feel. The more relaxed and the less overwhelmed you feel, the more your system is naturally going to be able to relate calmly to other people because you aren't chronically in a state of dysregulation that affects your relationships. And the more you're able to calmly form relationships with other people, the more support and the more comfort you both give and receive, and the greater a sense of belonging and community you experience. And the more you have a sense of belonging, community, and resource, the more you are now working your way into secure territory. And the more you work your way into secure territory, the more you're able to recognize when life gets stressful, what you need, and how to solve your problems holistically. Now, of course, this is an incredibly long process. However, anytime you're able to stop in a moment where you would have once berated yourself and blamed yourself as a morally flawed human being for the problem that you're having, and you're instead able to choose self-understanding, self-compassion, and proper contextualization of the problem, every single one of those moments, even if you can only do it 1/25th of the time, gets you one step closer to that eventual place where you are secure and resourced. It is a long journey. I'm not going to pretend it's easy, but the good news is you don't have to do it perfectly. A secure life and a secure attachment system gets built through a series of moments in which for even 1 minute, you are able to show up with compassion in a place where you could once only show up with shame and self-hate. Over the course of a lifetime, those minutes of self-compassion and self-understanding add up to a life where eventually the balance starts tipping in the favor of self-love. And once the balance has tipped in that favor, you're going to find that upward spiral starts happening on its own. All right, that's all I have to say for today on that cycle of toxic shame, procrastination, and how we can start giving ourselves compassion in those moments to start breaking the cycle at any point. As always, let me know what's coming up for you guys as you go through this video. I love you. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you back here again really soon.